Hello guys, in this video I'm going to be building Airfix's Messerschmitt Bf 109, and because you guys voted for it on my community tab, I'm going to be building the E7 variant in Japanese colours. As you can see, this is not an off-the-shelf kit, but it came with the Airfix Club membership back in 2012 I think. In reality this is the standard Bf 109 kit which is available in shops, but with different decals for the club kit. I'm not a member of the Airfix Club, I just found this on eBay, but I thought it looked quite interesting and I do like different takes on traditional aircraft camo schemes, so I bought it. So the two versions available in the kit are the RAF captured version, where the aircraft has been painted in your standard RAF dark earth and dark green on the upper side and the yellow on the bottom, and the version which you voted for, which is the Japanese version, in the standard German RLM 74, 75 and 76 camouflage, but with Japanese markings. Now the Japanese were sent 5 Bf-109s in 1941. Now these aircraft were not used in combat by the Japanese, but they were assessed by them, and some of the ideas were used later to influence Japanese aircraft designs later in the war. This kit is based on the 2010 tooling of the Bf-109 from Airfix, which is their most recent tooling. So if you've built any of the versions of that they've released, and there are quite a few of them, then it will be quite familiar to you. For once, I'm not going to talk too much during the video, other than to say that I was quite pleased with the amount of cockpit detail there was. Here I followed my standard procedure of building up the seat and the cockpit floor, and then attaching that to one side of the fuselage before putting down the paint. We do get a pilot figure in the kit, but I believe it's the standard one, so it's a standard Luftwaffe pilot, not a Japanese pilot. I'm not entirely sure why Airfix tell us to paint the inside of the lower wings here, because clearly you're not going to see any of that when the upper wings and the fuselage are in place. On the other hand, they don't tell us to paint the underside of the upper wings, which you will see through the wheel wells. So that was a little odd. Either way, I painted all of those areas and the cockpit with a base coat of RLM02, and this was from Vallejo Model Air. A paint that, now I feel my airbrush skills are improving, I feel a bit more comfortable spraying than I used to. That was laid down over a base coat of Tamiya XF1 Black, which would provide a shadow coat and provide something a bit grittier for that Model Air paint to grip onto, because I find spraying it directly onto plastic isn't always the best. Vallejo model colour paints were then used to pick out any details. These are my favourite paints for detail painting like this. They thin down really nicely with a little bit of water, and they just go down so well. You can see with the fuselage halves together that we do have a sort of engine block there. It's not particularly well detailed. I suppose there is the option to leave off the cowling, but I never really considered that to be an option, to be honest, so I didn't even bother painting that engine block. The flaps, the ailerons and the leading edges of the wing can all be posed in several different positions, which is a really nice touch. And because I was given all those options, I just put them in the default position of being straight, level and closed. I do get people sometimes in my comment section saying, oh, you don't clean up your parts, you don't sand pieces off your parts. Like here on this leading edge, for example, at the top there's a bit of a mark. I do clean up the parts, I typically do it off camera, because me sanding pieces is not a particularly exciting thing for you to see. And often I sort of, I get a bit excited, I cut a piece off and I want to dry fit it and film it, and then I'll come back later and I'll sand it before I actually finally fit it. Landing gear were easy to assemble. I did attach the wheel to the leg, but I left the Badar separate for easier painting. If we want to position the aircraft with the gear up, we have separate pieces to do that. That's a very nice touch because often the area inside the wing is a little bit too small because of scale issues and plastic thickness to actually put the real wheel into there and cover it up properly. So you can see that these replacement parts are just half wheels, just to give the effect of that downward facing wheel. Here we are with everything together, and it's starting to take the shape of a 109. The landing gear are just temporarily attached at the moment. There's clearly going to need to be a bit of sanding on the seam lines top and bottom. And if I'd read the instructions carefully, I would have drilled some holes in the lower wing surfaces so I could attach these parts here. Because I'm silly and didn't do that, I had to trim off the pins from these pieces and then manually position them. After some seam line sanding and filling, I've skipped ahead a couple of steps here. I've got a NATO black base coat down, and then I've used RLM 76 from AK Real Colours for the underside and the fuselage side. That's got a very nice hue to it. These are my two topside colours, again both from AK Real Colours. So this is RLM 74 and 75. I put down the greyish paint, the 75 first, then used Tamiya masking tape to start to mask off that classic kind of splinter pattern which we see on the horizontal surfaces on the 109. So of course we've got the splinters like this on the wing. And to do this I just follow the reference photos in the instructions, using those panel lines in the wings as guidance. We also have a fairly high demarcation line on the fuselage side. You can see that before I put this coat down I had already masked off the demarcation line on the fuselage side. Once I was happy with the masking, it was straight to the RLM 74. There we go, that's a nice looking result I think. A little bit glossy perhaps. I do have a habit of putting down paint a bit thick, so I need to get used to thinning it more and putting down thinner coats. But that is starting to look like a 109 I think. Now, to be honest with you, I messed up the modelling the first time and I thought I'd taken footage of the messed up plane, but evidently I didn't do that for some reason. Essentially what I did is I tried to freehand the modelling with very thin paint, although it wasn't thin enough, and very light pressure on the airbrush, although it wasn't light enough, and it basically came out looking like a leopard, not a very healthy leopard either. So I masked again, I went over the fuselage sides again with the RLM 76. In fact, you can just see some remnants of that there as I've gone over one pass of the RLM 76 to get rid of it. And then I decided to use this mask instead. This is a photo etch mask that I've had for a while. It's designed for sort of wear and tear, I think, effects more than anything else. But I thought it would look quite nice for the modelling as long as I was careful. And although the result wasn't amazing, it was definitely better than my first effort. So if you think this looks bad, you should see my first effort. Of course you can vary the intensity of the modelling, and they varied a lot on real aircraft as well, by changing the thickness of the paint, the thinning ratio of the paint. And of course for most of these I kept the mask away from the surface of the model, usually about 10 mm away from the surface. If you put the mask hard on the surface and spray, you're going to get a very hard edge to the mask. the further you pull it away, the softer that edge is going to be, all other things being equal. So that modelling was done with the RLM 75. I think in reality a lot of aircraft also used RLM 02, the cockpit colour, mixed in to do some modelling too. But in my case I didn't. I figured it looked okay enough and I didn't want to mess things up by going a bit further. Next up were the decals, so I gave the appropriate areas of the aircraft a coat of VMS gloss varnish. I find that helps the decals go down. I know it's not essential, but the surface wasn't super smooth, so the gloss helped make it a bit smoother. There are a surprising, to me at least, number of stencils on the Bf109, and Airfix seemed to include a good number of those. It took me a good few hours to get them all down. So we've got, of course, these do not walk areas on the wing roots. Of course, we've got the Japanese insignia. And as you can see here, a lot of stencils along the fuselage of the aircraft. To a certain extent, you might think that you won't notice these, and I think that's true, but I think you do notice their absence. Just including them makes the plane look a bit more realistic, a little less plain and empty. And with the decals down and dry, there wasn't too much more to do. There were, of course, the usual bits and pieces to add, so the exhausts, painted in black and dry brushed in a metallic colour. I gave everything a coat of VMS matte varnish, which really does bring everything down to a super matte finish. It's lovely stuff, although not the easiest in the world to airbrush. Then it was a case of doing a panel line wash. I didn't want too much weathering on this because I wanted to represent an aircraft that was straight out of the factory and straight over to Japan and just repainted with its Japanese markings. So I used this pre-made black mixture from Ammo. As you can see, it does a good job of highlighting those panel lines. Because we have a matte surface, it does somewhat spread into the surrounding area, but that's fine because it can be cleaned up and blended in quite nicely, and it helps provide a little bit of variation to the surface at the same time. I particularly like the effect on these vertical panel lines here on the fuselage. I think it really makes those stand out. With the panel line wash done and cleaned up where appropriate with some odourless thinner, my Bf109 was complete. And there we go, that was my Airfix Club Messerschmitt Bf 109 E7 in Japanese markings. Not one of the hardest kits to build, not the most effort I put into the weathering afterwards, but I'm happy with the end result, and I'm happy that it fits in there nicely as a factory fresh aircraft, about to be tested by the Japanese. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I've got a lot more videos where that came from. At the moment it does feel like I've got about 4 or 5 models at 95% finished. I'm trying to get those over the line as quickly as I can, but of course I have a full-time job as well. But do stay tuned for another video next week, where my video will feature an armour model for the first time in a while. I haven't forgotten armour, guys. I do like making armour models. It's just that I was on a bit of an aircraft run recently for some reason. Before I go, let me say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members. These guys make massive contributions to the channel, not just financially every month, but also in their ideas, their support, their discussions, the conversations that we have on the associated membership pages. It is really, really good fun to bounce ideas off them and get their ideas and see their models and their modelling rooms and so on. And it's a really nice, supportive, friendly community going on there. So if you'd like to be a member of that, then there are links in the description below. Until next time, thank you for watching and have fun modelling.